Lucas Greystone stood by the window in his home office, staring out at the perfectly manicured lawn below. The golden light of the setting sun stretched long shadows over the neatly trimmed grass, a quiet reminder of the order he had worked so hard to impose on his life. At 38, Lucas had built himself from humble beginnings into one of Austin's top civil engineers, climbing the professional ladder with methodical precision. He turned back to his desk, where blueprints and schematics for the massive bridge project sprawled out in front of him. This bridge, his magnum opus, would be the crowning achievement of his career, a lasting monument to his talent and dedication. Lucas allowed himself a small, satisfied smile before diving back into the work that had consumed his every waking moment for the past few months. Hours passed unnoticed until the faint sound of the front door closing broke his concentration. He glanced at his watch. 10:30 p.m. Marissa was home late again. He sighed and made his way downstairs, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness of the living room. He found Marissa in the kitchen, digging through the fridge. "You're home late," he remarked, leaning against the doorframe. Marissa jumped, clearly startled, before turning to face him. At 34, she still had a striking beauty, her realtor smile fixed in place, though there was something behind her eyes, a flicker of annoyance or maybe guilt. "Hey," she said, her voice a little too casual. "Yeah, I had a last-minute showing." "You know how it is," Lucas nodded, but his gaze never left her face. There was a time when Marissa had looked at him with admiration, when he could sense her pride in his accomplishments. Now, all he saw was a mask, carefully constructed, but a mask all the same. "So, how's the project going?" she asked, eager to change the subject. "It's coming along," Lucas replied, though he couldn't mask the exhaustion in his voice. "We're making good progress, but there's still a lot to do." Marissa's smile faltered slightly before she muttered under her breath, more to herself than to him. "There always is, isn't there?" The comment stung, but Lucas bit back his frustration. He knew his long hours were wearing on their marriage, but couldn't she see how important this project was? It was the key to securing their future, the culmination of all his hard work. He'd sacrificed so much to get this far, he couldn't afford to let anything derail him now. "I'm heading to bed," Marissa said, brushing past him without meeting his eyes. "Don't stay up too late." Lucas watched her go, a nagging unease settling in his stomach. Something felt off, though he couldn't quite place it. Maybe it had been off for a while now. But he pushed the feeling aside. He had work to do. The next morning, Lucas was already seated at his desk when Marissa emerged, dressed in workout clothes. "Going to the gym?" he asked, not even bothering to look up from his papers. Marissa grabbed her keys and tossed him a casual glance. "I have a session with my trainer." "Trainer?" Lucas's head snapped up at the word. "Since when do you have a trainer?" Marissa shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden attention. "For a couple of weeks now. I told you about it." Remember, Lucas was certain she hadn't, but he let it go. "Right. Well, have a good workout." As the door closed behind her, Lucas found himself unable to concentrate on his work. The image of Marissa with this mysterious trainer kept creeping into his mind. He tried to shake it off, telling himself he was being ridiculous. Marissa was allowed to have her own life outside of their home, right? But a small seed of doubt had been planted, and it kept growing. At the gym, Marissa approached the weight area, her heart pounding as she saw Ryder Kane, her trainer. His sculpted body drew admiring glances from the other gym-goers, and when he spotted Marissa, his face lit up with a grin that was all too confident. "There's my favorite client," he called out, loud enough for the others to hear. Ready to feel the burn, Marissa flushed, though she tried to play it cool. "Let's just get to work," she said, trying to brush off his enthusiasm. But Ryder's hands lingered a little too long when he adjusted her posture. His compliments began to feel less professional and more personal, a little too suggestive. "You're looking amazing, Marissa," he murmured as she finished a set of squats. "But your husband doesn't know how to appreciate what he's got at home." She should have shut him down, should have walked away. But instead, she found herself leaning into his words, craving the attention she hadn't received from Lucas in a long time. "Lucas is busy," she said, her voice betraying a touch of bitterness. "He's always busy." Ryder's eyes gleamed with interest. "His loss," he said, stepping closer. "What do you say we grab a drink after this? Celebrate all your hard work." Marissa hesitated, her wedding ring suddenly feeling heavy on her finger. But the thought of another night spent alone in their empty house while Lucas worked late was more than she could bear. "Sure," she heard herself say. "Why not?" Hours later, Marissa sat at a high-end bar downtown, nursing a cocktail and laughing at Ryder's jokes. He was everything Lucas wasn't: carefree, attentive, and full of exciting stories about his wild adventures. "I still can't believe you're married to that stiff shirt," Ryder said, leaning in close. "A woman like you deserves excitement." Passion. Marissa knew she should defend Lucas, should stand up for her husband. But the alcohol was loosening her inhibitions, and Ryder's attention felt intoxicating. "Lucas used to be different," she found herself saying. "When we first met, he was so driven, so ambitious. I admired that. But now he just takes me for granted." Ryder's gaze darkened, his hand brushing against hers as he spoke. "He doesn't know what he's got, Marissa," he said, his voice low and husky. "You're a free woman. You can do whatever you want. With whoever you want." Marissa's breath caught in her throat. Looking into Ryder's eyes, she made a choice that would change everything. Back at home, Lucas sat in his office, staring at his phone. The home security app had just shown Marissa arriving home far later than usual. He tried to tell himself it was nothing, that he was being paranoid. But a feeling of dread gnawed at him, a sense that something was very, very wrong. Over the next few weeks, Lucas began noticing subtle changes in Marissa. She was more distant, quicker to anger, and spending more time away from home. He tried to convince himself it was just stress, that things would return to normal once the project was finished. But deep down, he knew better. It was the little things that tipped him off, subtle signs that weren't easy to ignore. The unfamiliar cologne lingering on her clothes. The way she clutched her phone whenever he was near. The sudden shift in her appearance, as though she was trying to impress someone. Lucas wasn't a man prone to wild imaginations or fits of jealousy. He dealt in facts, in cold, hard evidence. So, he started collecting that evidence, carefully, methodically. He installed tracking software on their shared devices, set up cameras in their home, even hired a private investigator to follow Marissa when she said she was working late. All the while, he kept his cool, never once letting on that he suspected anything. He was laying the groundwork, quietly building an airtight case. Lucas Greystone didn't act on impulse or emotion. When he struck, it would be with the weight of undeniable proof. The tipping point came one Friday evening. Marissa was getting ready to go out, wearing an outfit that was far too revealing for the casual work events she claimed to be attending. Lucas watched her from the doorway of their bedroom, his face an impassive mask. "You going to that party tonight?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. Marissa jumped, nearly dropping her lipstick. "Yeah, it's just a work thing," she muttered, not meeting his eyes. "Why?" Lucas stepped further into the room, his presence filling the space. "Marissa," he said, his tone low and deliberate, "I'm not blind. If you walk out that door, don't expect to come back and find things the same." For a moment, there was a flash of fear in Marissa's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by defiance. "I'm a free woman, Lucas," she shot back, her voice bitter. "I can do whatever I want." "You don't own me." Lucas didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there, watching as Marissa grabbed her things and stormed out of the room, the front door slamming shut behind her. He allowed himself a small, cold smile. The trap was set. Now, it was time to spring it. At the rooftop party, Marissa tried to lose herself in the music and alcohol, pushing Lucas's warning to the back of her mind. She was laughing with some colleagues when a familiar voice cut through the noise. "There's my girl," Ryder called out, swaggering over with a drink in hand. He was already tipsy, his inhibitions lower than usual. Marissa felt a mix of excitement and dread as he approached. She knew she should keep her distance, especially with her colleagues watching, but Ryder had never been one to hold back. "You look smoking hot tonight," he said loudly, his eyes blatantly roving over her body. "But your husband doesn't even notice, does he?" Marissa flushed, acutely aware of the curious glances from her colleagues. "Ryder," she hissed, trying to keep the situation under control. But Ryder was beyond subtlety now, emboldened by alcohol and his own arrogance. "Come on, baby," he laughed. "It's not like it's a secret. Half the gym probably knows by now." The blood drained from Marissa's face. This was spiraling out of control. She opened her mouth to protest, to try and salvage whatever was left of the situation, when suddenly, a hush fell over the crowd. She turned, and her heart stopped. Lucas stood at the entrance to the rooftop, impeccably dressed in a black suit that seemed to absorb the light around him. His face was a mask of cold fury as he scanned the scene. His eyes locked onto Marissa and Ryder. Ryder, oblivious to the danger, swaggered toward Lucas. "You got a problem, man," he slurred, puffing out his chest. "I gave her a taste of what I can do." "Relax, dude." The silence that followed was suffocating. Marissa felt the world slow down around her. She wanted to scream, to run, but she was frozen in place, watching the scene unfold like a horrific car crash in slow motion. Lucas didn't speak. He didn't need to. In one fluid motion, he grabbed Ryder by the throat and slammed him to his knees before anyone could react. Lucas's fist connected with Ryder's face with a sickening crack, the sound echoing across the rooftop. Ryder crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Lucas stood over him for a moment, his breath steady, his face still an emotionless mask of controlled rage. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Marissa stood there, rooted to the spot, humiliation and terror washing over her in equal measure. She glanced around at the shocked faces of her colleagues, her friends, and realized with a sickening clarity that her life, as she knew it, was over. As Lucas descended in the elevator, a small, grim smile tugged at the corner of his lips. Phase 1 was complete. Now it was time to dismantle Marissa's world, piece by piece. Just as she had shattered the life they'd built together, he had no room for forgiveness, no desire for reconciliation. Marissa had made her choice, and now she would face the consequences. Lucas Greystone was not a man to be betrayed. Not a man to show weakness or mercy. As he stepped out into the night air, Lucas's mind raced with the next steps of his plan. The bridge project, his career, his reputation, everything he had worked so hard for would survive and thrive. But Marissa? Marissa would learn the true cost of crossing him. He drove home in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The events of the party replayed over and over in his mind, each replay stoking the cold fury burning in his chest. When he pulled into the driveway of their suburban Austin home, he allowed himself a moment to breathe, to center himself. Emotion wouldn't help him now. He needed to be calm, calculated, ruthless. He entered the house and immediately got to work with mechanical efficiency. He began gathering Marissa's belongings, clothes, jewelry, personal items, and piling them by the front door. As he worked, he dialed his lawyer. "John," Lucas said, his voice cold. "It's Lucas. I need you to file those divorce papers we discussed." "Yes, now. And I want the accounts frozen, just like we planned." He paused, listening to the response on the other end. "No, there's no need for a cooling-off period. I have all the evidence we need to make it happen." Lucas hung up and continued his task. By the time he heard a car pull into the driveway, a mountain of Marissa's possessions was already waiting by the door. He positioned himself in the foyer, his arms crossed, waiting for the key to turn in the lock. When Marissa stumbled inside, tear-stained and mascara smudged, the reality of what she had done came crashing down around her. Marissa froze the moment she saw Lucas standing in the foyer, her eyes darting between him and the pile of her belongings by the door. "Lucas," she started, her voice trembling, "we need to talk about what happened." "There's nothing to talk about," Lucas cut her off sharply, his voice cold and even. "You made your choice, Marissa. Now you deal with the consequences." Her face crumpled, the tears already welling in her eyes. "Please, just let me explain. It didn't mean anything, I swear." Ryder was just, "Get out." Lucas interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Take your things and leave. Now." Tears streamed down her face as she tried one last time. "Where am I supposed to go?" "This is my home too." Lucas's laugh was devoid of any warmth or humor. "Your home. You gave up any right to call this your home the moment you decided to lower your standards for that gym rat." Marissa recoiled, as though she'd been slapped, her eyes flashing with anger. "You bastard," she hissed. "You think you can just throw me away like this? I have rights." Lucas's gaze hardened, a dangerous gleam in his eyes. "Call your lawyer. I'm sure they'd love to see the evidence I've gathered, the hotel receipts, the text messages, the video footage. Go ahead, Marissa. Fight me on this. See how that works out for you." The color drained from her face as the full weight of his words settled in. "You've been spying on me," she whispered, her voice shaking with disbelief. Lucas shrugged, unfazed by her shock. "I prefer to think of it as protecting my interests. Now, for the last time, get out of my house." With trembling hands, Marissa began to gather her things, struggling to manage the bags as she loaded them into her car. Lucas stood impassively, making no move to help her. When she finally managed to get everything packed, she turned back to him, a desperate look in her eyes. "Lucas, please. We can work through this. We've been through so much together. Goodbye, Marissa." Lucas's voice was final as he closed the door in her face, hearing the engine of her car roar to life as she drove away. Lucas allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. Phase 2 was complete. Now it was time to ensure that Marissa understood the full scope of her new reality. In the days that followed, Marissa's world began to crumble with dizzying speed. When she tried to check into a hotel, her credit cards were declined. At the bank, she was told her accounts had been frozen pending legal proceedings. Her cell phone service was abruptly cut off, and she was left scrambling for cash, forced to rely on whatever money she had left. Desperate, humiliated, and with nowhere else to turn, she checked into a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. It was there, in the dead of night, that she received a call from her lawyer. "Mrs. Greystone." The voice on the other end was formal, yet sympathetic. "This is Alan Parker. I'm afraid I have some difficult news regarding your divorce proceedings." Marissa's hand tightened around the phone. "What is it? What's happened?" Alan's voice crackled through the speaker, grim and matter-of-fact. "Your husband has presented some rather compelling evidence of infidelity. Texts, emails, video footage. I'm sorry to say it, but it's quite damning. But that's invasion of privacy." Marissa protested, her voice rising in panic. "He can't just." "I'm afraid he can," Alan interrupted. "Everything was obtained legally. What's more, he's invoking the infidelity clause in your prenuptial agreement." Marissa's heart sank as the blood drained from her face. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It means," Alan said gravely, "you're entitled to nothing, Mrs. Greystone. No alimony. No share of assets. Legally speaking, you're walking away from this marriage with only what you brought into it." The foam slipped from Marissa's numb fingers as the full impact of Lucas's revenge hit her. She was ruined. Cast out with nothing but the clothes on her back and a mountain of regret. Meanwhile, Lucas threw himself into his work with relentless focus. The bridge project consumed his days and nights, a welcome distraction from the emptiness that filled his home. He ignored the concerned looks from colleagues and the whispered rumors that inevitably spread about his marriage. One evening, as he was engrossed in some calculations in his office, a knock on the door jolted him from his thoughts. He looked up to see David, his project manager, standing in the doorway, looking uncomfortable. "Come in, David," Lucas said, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. "What's on your mind?" David hesitated before sitting down, his hands nervously clasped. "Lucas, we're all a bit worried about you. You've been working non-stop, and after everything that happened with Marissa, my personal life is none of your concern." Lucas cut him off sharply, his voice icy. "The project is on schedule, isn't it?" "Well, yes, but," David started, then faltered under Lucas's steely gaze. "There's no problem. So long as the project's on track, that's all that matters, right?" "Exactly," Lucas said, his tone final. "Was there anything else?" David hesitated, then shook his head. "No. That's all. Just take care of yourself, okay?" As David left, Lucas returned to his work, pushing down the flicker of emotion that threatened to surface. He didn't need anyone's concern or pity. He had his work. His success. That was all that mattered now. Weeks passed, and Lucas settled into a new routine: work, home, sleep, repeat. He ignored the occasional text or email from Marissa, each one growing more desperate than the last. He deleted her voicemails without listening. As far as he was concerned, she no longer existed. It was a Saturday afternoon when the confrontation he'd been avoiding finally came. Lucas was in the backyard, methodically trimming the hedges when he heard the gate creak open. He turned to see Marissa standing there, a shadow of her former self. Her designer clothes were replaced by worn jeans and a faded t-shirt. Her once perfect hair hung limply around her face, unkempt. "You can't be here," Lucas said coldly, his voice hard as steel. "There's a restraining order in place." Marissa took a step forward, her eyes pleading. "Lucas, please. Just hear me out. What you doing, it's cruel. I made a mistake. I know that. But, a mistake." Lucas scoffed, his voice laced with disgust. "Is that what you call being with another man for months? Lying to my face day after day? I was lonely." Marissa cried, her voice breaking. "You were always working, always focused on your precious career. I needed something. Someone. And instead of talking to me, instead of trying to work things out, you chose to betray everything we built together." Lucas's tone was sharp, cutting through her excuses. "You made your choice, Marissa. Now live with it." Tears streamed down Marissa's face as she fell to her knees, sobbing. "Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? You've taken everything from me." For a moment, Lucas's expression flickered, a brief flash of something. Pity? Guilt? It was gone in an instant, buried beneath the cold, calculated resolve. He turned away without saying another word. Regret flashed across Lucas's face, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a mask of cold indifference. "That's not my problem anymore," he said flatly. "You should leave before I call the police." Marissa turned, defeated, but as she reached the door, Lucas's voice called out behind her. "And Marissa," he added, his tone sharp. "I'd start looking for a job if I were you. I hear the diner on 5th is hiring waitresses." The look of devastation on her face as she left gave Lucas the grim sense of satisfaction. She had torn his world apart. Now, she was experiencing the same pain, the same loss. Tenfold. Later that evening, Lucas sat in his empty living room, nursing a glass of whiskey, when his phone buzzed with a text. It was from an unknown number, but Lucas knew immediately who it was. "Lucas, it's Ryder. We need to talk." This has gone too far. Call me. Lucas stared at the message, a humorless smile curling at his lips. So, the great writer Kane had finally gathered the courage to reach out. Too little, too late. He typed a response without hesitation. There's nothing to talk about. Enjoy the consequences of your actions. With a swift motion, he blocked the number. Tossing his phone aside, Lucas took another sip of whiskey. Let Ryder stew in his own mess. Let him feel the weight of his choices, crushing down on him just as it had on Marissa. As the days turned into weeks, Lucas watched from afar as the aftermath of the affair continued to unravel for both Marissa and Ryder. Ryder's gym business began to suffer as word of the affair spread. His clients, especially the women, started to distance themselves. The once cocky, confident man was now a shadow of himself, scrambling to salvage his reputation. Marissa, stripped of her real estate license due to the scandal, was reduced to working as a waitress at a dingy diner. Lucas heard through the grapevine that she tried to reach out to her well-off family, only to be rejected. They were more concerned with avoiding the public scandal than helping their disgraced daughter. Through it all, Lucas remained focused on his work. The bridge project, his legacy, was nearing completion, and he threw himself into the final stages with single-minded determination. His colleagues had learned not to bring up Marissa or his personal life. To them, Lucas Greystone had become a machine, cold, efficient, and unwavering in his focus. It was a crisp autumn morning when Lucas stood at the base of the completed bridge, surrounded by city officials and members of the press. As he cut the ribbon, officially opening the structure to the public, he allowed himself a rare moment of genuine pride. This was his legacy. His mark on the world. A reporter pushed forward, microphone in hand. Mr. Greystone, this project has been hailed as a masterpiece of modern engineering. How does it feel to see it completed? Lucas paused, considering his words carefully before responding. It feels right, he said finally. This bridge represents years of hard work, dedication, and unwavering commitment. It's proof that with the right focus and determination, you can overcome any obstacle. As the crowd applauded, Lucas's gaze swept across the faces in the crowd. For a brief moment, he thought he saw Marissa standing at the back, watching with a mixture of longing and regret. But when he looked again, she was gone. If she had ever been there at all. Later that evening, as Lucas sat in his office reviewing the press coverage of the bridge opening, there was a knock at the door. David, his project manager, stood hesitantly in the doorway. "Got a minute, boss?" David asked. Lucas nodded, gesturing for him to come in. "What's on your mind, David?" David sat down, looking uncomfortable. "I just wanted to say congratulations on the bridge. It's a hell of an achievement." "Thank you," Lucas replied, sensing there was more to come. David took a deep breath. "Look, I know it's not my place, but are you okay, Lucas? Really okay?" For a moment, Lucas considered brushing the question aside with his usual cold efficiency. But something in David's genuine concern made him pause. "I'm managing," he said quietly. "The work helps," David nodded. "I get that. But there's more to life than work, you know. What happened with Marissa, it's awful, no question. But holding on to that anger, that need for revenge, it's not healthy, man." Lucas felt a flare of irritation. "I don't recall asking for your opinion on my personal life, David." I know, David said, holding up his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm probably overstepping, but someone had to say it. You become different, Lucas. Colder. I'm worried about you, that's all." For a long moment, Lucas said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, firm. "I appreciate your concern, David, but I'm fine. What happened with Marissa, it's done. Over. I've moved on." David looked like he wanted to say more but thought better of it. He stood, nodding. "All right. Just remember, you've got people who care about you, okay? Don't shut everyone out. As David left, Lucas turned to stare out the window, his reflection ghostly in the darkened glass. Had he changed? Become colder? Perhaps. But he had survived. He had thrived. And he had done it all without compromising who he was or what he believed in. In the end, that was all that mattered. Lucas stood at the window of his office, watching the sun set over the Austin skyline. The completed bridge stretched out before him, a testament to his skill, his determination. As darkness fell, the bridge's lights flickered to life, a beacon of progress, achievement. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. "Come in," Lucas called, not turning from the window. David entered, holding a stack of papers in his hand. "Got the final reports on the bridge project, boss. Everything's in order. We're officially done." Lucas nodded, finally turning to face his project manager. "Good work, David. You and the team should be proud." David hesitated before speaking again. "Listen, Lucas, there's something else. I overheard some of the guys talking. Apparently, your ex-wife has been asking around about you." Lucas's jaw tightened. "Marissa. What does she want?" David shrugged, uncomfortable. "Not sure. But word is, she's in pretty bad shape. Lost her job at the diner. Can't make rent. Some people are saying she's been sleeping in her car." The briefest flicker of something, pity, maybe, flashed across Lucas's face, but it was gone before David could catch it. "Is that so?" Lucas said evenly. "Well, I'm sure she'll figure it out. She always does." David, sensing the finality in Lucas's tone, nodded and left without saying another word. A flicker of something crossed Lucas's eyes, a brief spark of emotion he quickly buried. "That's not my problem," he said, his voice flat. "Marissa made her choices. Now she's dealing with the fallout." David looked like he had more to say, but then seemed to think better of it. "Right. Well, I'll leave these reports with you. Have a good night, Lucas." As the door clicked shut behind David, Lucas turned his gaze back to the window. He tried to focus on the bridge ahead of him, on the satisfaction of his victory, but Marissa's face kept intruding into his mind, a thorn he couldn't shake. With a frustrated grunt, he grabbed his keys and headed for the door. The streets of Austin were eerily quiet as Lucas drove, his mind drifting without a clear destination. Without even thinking, he found himself passing through Marissa's old neighborhood, gliding by her favorite coffee shop. It was then that something familiar caught his attention. There she was, Marissa, sitting alone at an outdoor table, cradling a cup of coffee in her hands. Even from a distance, it was obvious how much she had changed. Her once fashionable clothes hung awkwardly on her now thin frame, and her hair was a dull, tangled mess. She looked broken. Before he could stop himself, Lucas pulled the car over and got out. Marissa looked up as he approached, her eyes widening with shock and fear. "Lucas," she stammered, her voice wavering. "What are you doing here?" Lucas stood there for a long moment, suddenly unsure of his purpose. Finally, he spoke. "I heard you've been asking about me." Marissa's laugh was empty, hollow. "Checking up on me? Making sure your revenge is complete?" "It's not about revenge," Lucas replied coldly, his tone hard as stone. "It's about justice. You betrayed me, Marissa. You threw everything we built together into the trash." Tears welled up in Marissa's eyes as she whispered, "I know. God, Lucas, I know. I've been paying for it every single day. Isn't that enough? Haven't I suffered enough?" For a brief moment, a flicker of pity stirred inside Lucas, but he crushed it instantly. "You made your choice, Marissa. Now you're stuck with it." Marissa's face crumpled, and her voice cracked. "Please, Lucas. I've got nothing left. No job, No home, no family, they all turned their backs on me. I don't know what to do anymore. Lucas remained silent, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was icy. That's not my problem, Marissa. You should have thought about the consequences before you decided to cheat. As he turned to leave, Marissa called after him, her voice desperate. What about Ryder? Did you ruin his life too? Lucas stopped and let out a humorless chuckle, a wisp of a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Roger destroyed his own life. Last I heard, his gym's about to close down. Turns out women aren't too keen on trainers who sleep with married clients. With that, Lucas walked away, leaving Marissa sobbing at the table. As he drove home, he tried to convince himself that the encounter hadn't affected him, but a voice in the back of his mind kept whispering that maybe, just maybe, he'd gone too far with his revenge. The following morning, Lucas was back at work, burying himself in new projects, trying to drown out any lingering doubts. He was in the middle of a conference call when his assistant buzzed through on the intercom. I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Greystone, but Mr. Kane is here to see you. He says it's urgent. Lucas's anger flared at the mention of Ryder Kane's name. The nerve of that man. Tell him to leave. If he's still here when I come out, I'll have security escort him out. But before his assistant could respond, the door burst open and Ryder stormed in. The once confident trainer now looked like a shell of his former self, disheveled, unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes. You bastard, Ryder growled. You've ruined everything. My business, my reputation, it's all gone because of you. Lucas stood slowly, his voice calm but lethal. I didn't ruin anything, Ryder. You did that to yourself when you decided to be with my wife. Without warning, Ryder lunged at him, grabbing him by the shirt. It wasn't like that. Marissa came on to me. She was lonely, neglected. Lucas broke Ryder's grip in one swift motion, shoving him back with a fierce look in his eyes. Just what? Being a good friend? Don't insult my intelligence, Ryder. You knew exactly what you were doing. Ryder's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. What do you want from me, man? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. I screwed up. But this scorched earth campaign of yours, it's too much. Lucas's laugh was bitter, cold. Too much. You destroy my marriage, betray my trust, and then have the gall to tell me I'm going too far. No, Ryder. This is just the beginning. It was a mistake. Ryder shouted, desperation in his voice. People make mistakes, Lucas. Don't they deserve second chances? For a long moment, Lucas just stared at him with cold contempt, his silence speaking volumes. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and menacing. Not for me, they don't. Now get out of my office before I have you thrown out. As Ryder slunk away, defeated, Lucas sank back into his chair, staring at the empty space where his rival had stood. He should have felt triumphant seeing the man who'd ruined his life brought low. But instead, all he felt was emptiness. The weeks that followed were a blur of work and sleepless nights. Lucas threw himself into new projects with a fervor that bordered on obsession. His colleagues noticed the change, the cold, unapproachable air that seemed to radiate from him. It was late one evening when David once again appeared at his office door. Lucas. Can we talk? Lucas looked up from his computer, irritation crossing his face. What is it, David? I'm busy. David stepped inside and closed the door behind him. That's just it, Lucas. You're always busy. You never leave the office. You never socialize with the team. It's not healthy, man. I don't remember asking for your opinion on my life, Lucas snapped. David held up his hands in a gesture of peace. I know. I know. But someone has to say it. You've changed. Ever since what happened with Marissa. Don't say her name, Lucas growled. David continued, undeterred. Ever since the divorce, you've been different. Colder. More ruthless. It's like you've lost a part of yourself. Lucas stood abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. I haven't lost anything, David. I just realized what really matters: success, achievement, things that can't betray you or let you down. David shook his head, his expression full of concern. Is that really all that matters to you now? What about friendship? Love? Forgiveness? Forgiveness? Lucas scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. Forgiveness is for the weak. It's a luxury I can't afford, Lucas said, his voice hard. Can't afford? David pressed, his gaze piercing. Or are you just too afraid to risk it? For a brief moment, Lucas's mask slipped, a flicker of something, pain, maybe, flashed beneath the icy exterior. But it was gone before David could even register it. I think you should leave now, David, Lucas said quietly, dangerously so, as David reached the door. David hesitated, turning back one last time. Just think about what I said, Lucas. It's not too late to choose a different path. Once alone in his office, Lucas tried to immerse himself in his work. But David's words lingered in his mind, echoing over and over. Had he really changed? Was his pursuit of revenge costing him more than he could afford? Days passed in a blur, and Lucas found himself becoming increasingly distracted. He caught himself staring at old photos of Marissa, wondering where she was now, how she was managing, even entertaining the idea of reaching out to her. But each time, his pride and anger held him back, keeping his hands firmly tied. Then, one rainy Saturday afternoon, fate intervened. Lucas was driving home from the office when he spotted a familiar figure huddled under a bus stop shelter. Without thinking, he pulled over, barely registering the impulse. Marissa looked up as he approached, her eyes wide with surprise and fear. She was drenched, soaked to the bone, shivering against the cold. Get in the car, Lucas said gruffly, his voice uncharacteristically soft. Marissa hesitated, then shot him a suspicious glance. Why? So you can gloat some more. Lucas sighed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Just get in, Marissa. You're going to catch your death out here. Reluctantly, Marissa climbed into the passenger seat, and they drove in silence, the tension thick in the air between them. Once inside Lucas's house, he handed her a towel and some dry clothes, his old clothes, the ones he'd never gotten around to donating after the divorce. As she changed in the bathroom, Lucas paced the living room, feeling a gnawing sense of unease. What the hell was he doing? When Marissa emerged, she looked smaller than he remembered, vulnerable in her old sweater, a stark contrast to the confident woman she had once been. Why did you bring me here, Lucas? She asked quietly, her voice a soft tremor. Lucas struggled to find the words. I don't know, he admitted after a long pause. I saw you out there, and I just couldn't leave you in the rain. Marissa's laugh was bitter, laced with a kind of hollow pain. That's rich, coming from the man who left me with nothing. You left me first, Lucas shot back, old anger flaring to life once again. You threw away everything, our marriage, our future, for a fling with that gym rat. I know, Marissa whispered, tears streaming down her face. God, Lucas. I know. I've regretted it every day since. But what you did, the way you destroyed my life, my career, was it really necessary? Lucas turned away, unable to meet her gaze. You hurt me, Marissa, he said quietly, the pain in his voice almost a whisper. More than I ever thought possible. I wanted you to feel that same hurt. Marissa's shoulders sagged as the weight of his words landed, the last bit of hope seeming to drain from her. Well, congratulations, Lucas, she said softly. You succeeded. I've lost everything. My job, my family, my self-respect. Are you happy now? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with the ghosts of the past. Lucas stared at her, his mind racing, wanting to say yes, to feel the satisfaction he'd been chasing for so long. But when he looked at her, really looked at her, all he felt was an overwhelming sadness. No, he whispered, his voice barely audible. No, I'm not happy. The admission seemed to shatter something between them. Marissa sank onto the couch, her body racked with sobs, while Lucas stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he sat down beside her, careful to keep some distance between them. I'm sorry, Marissa, he said hesitantly. Not for exposing your affair or filing for divorce. You deserve that. But the rest of it, maybe I went too far. Marissa looked up at him, her tear-streaked face searching his for any sign of hope. Does this mean, can you forgive me? Lucas was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was firm, but not unkind. No, Marissa. I can't forgive you. What you did broke something between us that can't be fixed. But maybe we can both try to move on. Let go of this anger, this bitterness, before it destroys us completely. Marissa nodded slowly, a glimmer of something like relief in her eyes. I'd like that, she whispered. They spent hours talking, bearing the years of pain and resentment that had built up between them. By the time Marissa left, Lucas felt as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He hadn't forgiven her, he didn't think he ever could, but he had taken the first step toward letting go. The next day, Lucas called his lawyer. I want to revise the divorce settlement, he said. Set up a modest alimony payment for Marissa. Enough to help her get back on her feet. Nothing more. Are you sure? The lawyer asked, his voice tinged with surprise. After everything that happened? I'm sure, Lucas replied, his voice resolute. It's not about forgiveness. It's about moving forward. In the weeks that followed, Lucas began to reconnect with the world around him. He joined his team for after-work drinks, started mentoring younger engineers, and even thought about dating again. The pain of Marissa's betrayal still lingered, a dull ache in his chest, but it no longer consumed him. One evening, as Lucas stood on the bridge he had built, watching the sun dip below the horizon over Austin, a sense of peace washed over him. He had survived the storm of betrayal, and he was stronger for it. He hadn't forgiven her, and he never would, but he had found a way to move forward, free from the suffocating weight of bitterness. As the lights of the bridge flickered to life, casting a golden glow across the water, Lucas allowed himself a small smile. The future stretched out before him, full of possibilities. In this time, he would face it on his own terms, wiser, stronger, and free from the shackles of the past.